You're listening to Talking to Teens, where we speak with leading experts from a variety of disciplines about the art and science of parenting teenagers. I'm your host, Andy Earle. We're here today with Dr. Ellen Hendrickson, a clinical psychologist who helps millions calm their anxiety and be their authentic selves. She serves on the faculty at Boston University Center for Anxiety and Related Disorders, and she's the author of How to Be Yourself, Quiet Your Inner Critic, and Rise Above Social Anxiety. Ellen was the founding host of the award-winning podcast Savvy Psychologist, which was downloaded 15 million times and rose up to the number 3 overall spot on the iTunes charts, and was picked as a best new podcast on iTunes. Her scientifically based zero-judgment approach has been featured in New York Magazine, The Guardian, Harvard Business Review, Scientific American, Oprah's Magazine, Real Simple, Business Insider, Psychology Today, and many other media outlets. We're going to be talking with Ellen today about social anxiety and how we can help our teenagers deal with it and be their authentic selves. We're going to talk about what's at the core of social anxiety, why social anxiety can sometimes actually be a good thing. And we're going to take a look at what happens in the teenage brain when kids get into situations that make them anxious. Then we're going to cover some step-by-step approaches parents can use to help teenagers conquer their fears and do the things that scare them so they can live their best life and be their authentic selves. All that and so much more is coming up on the show today. Dr. Hendrickson, thank you so much for being here. So talk to me a little bit about this topic. How does one become an expert on being oneself? That seems like a really interesting thing to study and to learn about. And I'm curious, what got you into that?
Sure. So yes, I am a clinical psychologist, and under that umbrella, I am an anxiety specialist. But under that umbrella, social anxiety has a very special place in my heart. So that is my super specialty. And I got into the idea of writing How to Be Yourself for just a variety of factors. So one is that, as an anxiety specialist and as, watching myself work with all these clients who, come in with social anxiety, I realized that a lot of the evidence-based techniques, the things that really work were inaccessible. They were either in the ivory tower, like they were stuck in research labs, clinical research labs, or they were stuck in, kind of boutique private anxiety centers, not to knock my own workplace, but
right.
I'm in a university affiliated, anxiety specialty center, and we don't take insurance, which is problematic, but we are dealing with this as it is now. So my goal is to be a bridge. I want to take what is known, what works in that ivory tower, in those specialty centers, and make them as accessible as possible. And so I love what you do. I podcasted myself for 5 years. And then writing this book was another big part of trying to just spread the word, just get really good information out there to people who wouldn't otherwise have immediate access. So for the price of a book or for a free podcast, it's
there are great tools.
We all deserve the best.
The research is being done.
Exactly. We all deserve the best tools. Yes.
So you write that kind of at the core of all of this is this idea of avoidance and kind of the double-edged sword of avoidance, where it does, in the short term, it makes you feel better to just not have to deal with whatever the situation is that kind of seems scary to you or awkward or hard to deal with. You get to not have to face down that negative emotion. And so great success, avoidance wins the day. But of course, in the long term, avoidance is disastrous. So why do you think a that's such a difficult thing. And particularly to me, it seems really important during the teenage years, as a parent, kind of watching for where your teenager might be avoiding things and sort of providing that nudge to engage with those things.
Oh, so much to unpack there. The great question. Okay, so I'm glad you started with that because avoidance really is the heart of the matter, and not even just for social anxiety. Avoidance is the heart of many psychological disorders,
Yeah.
but particularly the anxiety disorders, and even not even disorders like what I call lowercase s social anxiety. Okay. So if we're faced with something that we fear, our anxiety is going to shoot up. That makes sense.
Yeah.
We get thrown into fight or flight. But if we don't have to deal with that thing, that our anxiety plummets like a stone. And that's highly reinforcing. That is like crack. It feels really good. Like, oh, I don't have to talk to those people. I don't have to give that presentation. I don't have to raise my hand in class. Oh, she didn't call on me. And however, just like you said, it is disastrous long term. Short term, it provides relief. But then inevitably, another anxiety provoking situation is going to happen again. And blammo, our anxiety shoots up again. And so we end up in this yo-yo pattern of anxiety avoidance, anxiety avoidance, anxiety avoidance. And so what we want to do is not to throw ourselves into terrifying situations, but to be cliche, push ourselves out of our comfort zone just a little bit and to hang in there and to do the thing, kindly. We can be nice to ourselves as we do the hard thing, but to hang in there and to do the thing. And then our brain recalibrates and we gather evidence and experience that refutes what I call the two lies of social anxiety. One is that the worst case scenario is bound to happen. Like the worst case scenario is a foregone conclusion. So everybody's going to point and laugh, or the teacher will say, like, you were supposed to know that, or just other disastrous things that our brain, of course, like immediately latches onto. So that's one. And the second lie of social anxiety is I can't handle it. I can't deal with rolling with the punches. I can't handle the blips and bloops that teenage social life is going to inevitably throw at me. And so as we hang in there and do the thing, like face our fear, then again, our brain recalibrates. It says, oh, okay, well, the last 5 times I did that, my worst case scenario didn't happen. So maybe that actually won't happen. Or the last 5 times I did that, I actually, that wasn't perfect. That was, kind of ungainly or awkward or, but I survived. Maybe I can do that again. And that's how we gain confidence.
So we sort of jumped in here, started talking about social anxiety, and there's kind of the assumption that it's not good. We don't want that. We want to be confident and rah, and all of these nice and wonderful things, and we don't want the social anxiety. But you actually do point out a little bit here on page 47. You start getting talking about actually the ways in which social anxiety is a little bit of a good thing. So how is that possible? And why do you talk about that?
So it's such good questions. I'm glad you asked that too. So social anxiety is a package deal. So it goes along with, I mean, of course, it's very uncomfortable. Like, it's not great to, be in the laser beam of a socially anxious moment.
Right.
But it goes along with being empathetic, with being pro-social, which means like, being thoughtful, being kind, being considerate. There's some kind of weird random things that are in that package deal. We remember faces better, I think, because we're like, attuned and focused on.
Yeah, you're more tuned.
Yeah, and we're highly conscientious, which is the number one predictor of both objective and subjective success in life. So if by, things you can actually measure and things that are more intangible, like happiness. So that conscientiousness is a real heart of social anxiety, and at its core is really good. When it tips the scales, when it kind of tips the balance, it can turn into perfectionism, which we can talk about. It can turn into kind of caring too much what people think. But when we roll that back just a little bit, when we kind of turn down the flame a little bit on social anxiety, turn down caring too much what people think, we just get caring about people. And that's always a good thing.
Yeah. And the opposite of having too low of social anxiety is not a good situation. It's maybe worse because it's not, we can use some of these techniques you talk about in this book and we can dial it down, but it's kind of actually maybe harder to just create it out of thin air when it's when we've got a person who doesn't feel any of it. So
Right. No, in the book I talk about how you would think, like, intuitively the opposite of social anxiety is confidence, but that's not actually true. The opposite of social anxiety is psychopathy, is being a psychopath, which
right.
is characterized by fearless dominance and self-centered impulsivity. And, we don't need any more psychopaths in this world. So, yeah, so the opposite of social anxiety is something really not good.
There's a study that you talk about in this book, and we get a bunch of babies, 117 babies, and we bring them in, and we start looking at how they respond to a bunch of different things in the lab, in terms of just seeing new things, being exposed to new things, having a new person come in and seeing, what do they kind of go run and just play with this new person, or are they more kind of wary? And they sort of divide the babies into categories based on whether they're more the kind of hang back, be cautious kind of baby, or the more just jump right in, everything's good kind of baby. But then what I thought was really interesting about it is you say they then follow up with these kids 13 years later or something like that when they're teenagers, and what they found when they followed up was really interesting. What was it about the kids 13 years later that was so fascinating?
Yeah, so this is the work of Dr. Cynthia Garcia Cole, and she is an esteemed psychologist now. Forgive me, I can't remember the name of her university. She is now in Puerto Rico, which is where she grew up,
Okay.
and but she spent a long and storied career at Brown University, and I was privileged to be her student at one point. I took a class that she was teaching, and so I got to see her work not only through the pages of a journal, but up close and personal.
Right.
And so the study that you talk about was her dissertation, and so she brought all these 21-month kids, toddlers, into the lab, and yeah, it's like I was going to say subjected them, but that sounds bad. Had them, had them experience some novel situations, like had them meet a research assistant as, a new person, had them, join her in some play, had them see, a robot that the lab had built,
Right.
just, and wanted to see how they reacted to novelty and how they rolled with the punches. And so some of those kids, stuck in their mom's lap, didn't want anything to do with this. And some, ran into the room like, ready to explore. And so the level of inhibition was really different. Now, you would think that the kids who were more reticent, again, stayed in mom's lap, were shy, painfully shy even, would be in for a tough time. But that group, particularly the shy, kind of inhibited kids, as teenagers, kind of sorted themselves into two groups. Some of them indeed did have some trouble. They were, had some separation anxiety, had some social anxiety, had some, general, were worriers, whatnot. But others, while retaining their, shy, perhaps being wired to be more anxious than the typical kid, were just fine. They were quiet, but they were confident. They were doing just fine. And those were the introverts, those were the non-anxious introverts.
Yeah.
And so genetics is not destiny. Personality is not destiny.
Right.
I think there's certainly been a fantastic and well-deserved, kind of introvert power movement recently.
Yeah.
However, like introversion is still associated with being more anxious or being more prone to depression and, some not great things. But you can absolutely be a non-anxious introvert. And I think the key there is, ironically, avoiding avoidance. Again, doing the things, and to be cliche, getting yourself out there and learning, oh, I can do this, or like, hey, like I can, again, handle what life throws at me.
So you write a bit in this book about what is going on inside of the brain during social anxiety. And I found this really interesting because you are writing in here about the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. And you're writing about how we all have this natural response from our amygdala when we get into a socially stressful situation. Our brain stem is going, what's happening here? This is scary. But then people who are less socially anxious, then their prefrontal cortex kind of kicks in and says, well, wait a minute, this isn't that big of a deal. I think we can chill here. And I thought this was really interesting because this is what a number of people have said is going on in the teenage brain, that just in general, that the teenage years is described by neuroscientists as this period where, you have this really strong amygdala response, but you haven't really myelinated those paths to the frontal cortex yet. And so you're not able to then inhibit that response. So I just thought there was a really interesting parallel there between social anxiety and just adolescence. And I was wondering sort of if you could speak to that, or is that then kind of social anxiety going to be really emerging a lot during the teenage years, or how do those two things kind of relate?
Yeah, no, that's another good question. So so social anxiety typically begins between ages 8 and 15. So that is exactly
Ah,
when the teenage brain is getting that
wow.
upgrade that starts in the back and moves its way to the front. So, I'm pointing to the back of my head, base of my skull right now. It starts in basically the brainstem and then works its way up over, over your head towards your forehead. And then if you, put your hand on your forehead, like you're checking for a fever, that's your prefrontal cortex. And that
Yeah.
is the last part of teenage brain to be upgraded, which unfortunately is also the part of the brain that's responsible for organization and planning ahead and all the things
Yikes.
that that we lament, stereotypically lament with teenagers, like, why can't they? Why? How did they not see that coming? Or why did they not plan for that? But so in social anxiety, again, all the architecture is there. It's just a little slower. And so the analogy I use is that, in the face of threat, the more typically wired non-socially anxious brain dispatches a fire truck to the scene, where the socially anxious brain dispatches a guy on a bicycle with a bucket of water. So it's just slower and not as adequate a response. But the good news is that can be retrained, that
Mm,
those pathways, if we consciously use them more, so we can push back cognitively, with our thoughts and beliefs, and kind of questioning the rules in our head, or our actions. We can also put action first and do the thing before we feel ready. We can talk more
yeah.
about that as well. Then our actions can actually change our brain. There are studies showing that anything you do very often, like folks who drive a taxi, have just amazing spatial, that
Yeah.
portion
Yeah.
of their brain is very well developed. Musicians, that part of their brain is well developed. And so we can't, our brains are actually pretty plastic, which is surprising, even into adulthood, but definitely when we're in those teenage years, it's probably as plastic as it's going to be, with the
Yeah.
exception of 0 to 5. And so we can help that along. We can turbocharge that process by questioning that inner critic, that those socially anxious thoughts that keep kind of whispering in our ear,
Yeah.
and by not avoiding.
You have a Mad Lib in this
Yeah.
book that you
Yes.
recommend. This is a highly recommended Mad Lib that you include in here, and it's pretty simple. It just says, when blank, it will become obvious that I am blank. Okay,
Sure.
so
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
what is
Yeah.
going on with this?
Social anxiety is okay. So technically, social anxiety is a fear of being judged. But
Yeah.
more than that, okay, and this is the work of Dr. David Moskovich at the University of Waterloo. So he thinks about social anxiety in kind of a different way than the canon, but I think he's really onto something. And in talking to him, he said, I have people with social anxiety write to me and say, that's it, that you got it, and so I think that rings true for people who live with this condition. And so I'm,
Yeah.
and it rings true for me as well. That social anxiety, more than just the fear of being judged, is more the fear of being revealed. That in like capital S social anxiety, like disorder, there's this belief that there's something wrong with us, that there's something like insufficient. And my big asterisk, my big disclaimer with clients is that that's a distortion. That's why this is a disorder. So like just because you think, oh my God, I'm such a loser, or like, oh my God, I'm incompetent, does not mean it's true. It's a distortion. Anyway, okay. So, but he believes that social anxiety is essentially the fear that distortion is going to become obvious to everyone around you, and that the distortions fall into one of four buckets. One is appearance. So like I'm fat, my skin is blemished, so, that goes with acne with the teenage years, like my hair is a mess, like I'm not dressed appropriately. So appearance. Second bucket is the signs of social anxiety themselves. So people are going to see that I'm blushing, that my hands are shaking, that I'm sweating through my shirt, that my voice is quavering. Third bucket is our social skills. People are going to see that I have nothing to say. People are going to see that I go blank. People are going to see that I'm not funny, I'm not cool. And the fourth bucket is kind of our entire personality. It's our whole character. Like people are going to see that I'm boring, I'm a failure, I'm a loser, I'm incompetent, I'm a freak, fill in the blank. And so we don't have to just, stick our finger in one bucket. We might have, one to all four of those buckets as a whole. Exactly. All you can worry about. And it can change, from situation to situation. Like, I don't know, somebody who has difficulty using the phone, has phone anxiety, might, in that situation, worry, oh, like they're not going to understand me and it's going to get really awkward. Whereas then in class, they might think, oh my gosh, like the teacher's going to call on me and I'm going to give the wrong answer or go blank, and then everyone's going to think I'm stupid. So it might be there are different reveals in different situations, and also it changes as your stage of life changes. So like for me, I have my own history of social anxiety, and in college, the reveal was, oh my God, everyone's going to see that like I'm a big loser, and so I would try to compensate by like making sure I was very socially busy. And then when I was starting my career, the reveal morphed into like people are going to see that I'm incompetent, and so I like tried to overcompensate, overachieve to make up for this perceived deficit, this perceived problem, which I've since learned was a distortion. But and so it takes a while to learn that. But I did it the hard way, and that's why people have this book. They don't have to do it the way I did.
That's right. You can do it by filling in the Mad Lib.
Yes.
And if there's a step-by-step system in here. You also, in addition to the Mad Lib, you have 3 magic questions. Why are they magic, and what are they?
Sure. So, okay, the technical term for this is cognitive restructuring, which basically just means pushing back on your anxiety. It means like, kind of pulling up the rug of your anxiety and shining a bright flashlight under it and saying like, really, is that true? And so try to question the automatic worries and assumptions. Okay, so let me preface this by saying that anxiety is vague. And so, especially with social anxiety, it turns into something like, everyone's going to hate me, or something bad is going to happen, which is so vague. And like really, almost anything happens and we say like, see, I was right. Okay, so the preface is to try to narrow that down and to specify what our feared outcome is. Like, what are we really afraid is going to happen?
Yeah.
And that becomes easier to argue with. It's, you can't really push back on this vague, hazy thing, but if you can narrow it down and put it into focus, it is easier to argue with. Okay, that said, so then the magic questions become, how bad would that really be? And that's not a rhetorical question. Like that's not like, it would be fine, you'd be all right. It really is a genuine question. Like, how bad would that be if if that feared outcome occurred? If again, I'm calling to, I don't know, order takeout. I realize nobody does that anymore. Everybody orders online, but let's just pretend we're doing that. Okay. And for whatever reason, the person who picks up the phone doesn't understand when we go through some awkward exchanges. How bad is that? Would that person remember that 5 minutes after we hung up? Would it be awkward in the moment? Sure. Does it have any bearing on our life? No, none whatsoever. So once we specify the anxiety, a lot of kind of socially anxious, awkward moments can be refuted in that case. Like, how bad would that really be? Like, not great, but not terrible. So that's one. Yeah. Another is, what are the odds? And this question you can bring out when it really would be bad, when it really would be catastrophic. But catastrophes are rare. And so we can think to ourselves, like, okay, what would have to happen? Like, what events would have to line up for that feared catastrophic outcome to actually happen?
Yeah.
And what are the chances of each of those, things falling in line? So that we can kind of do the math, if we want to do this in a very left brain, nerdy, engineering type way, which I love, by the way, we can say, okay, well, maybe there's a 5% chance of, step 1 happening, and a 6% chance of step 2, a 50% chance of step 3. But then if you multiply all those out, like, you get this, very, very tiny number. And then you can ask yourself, okay, the chances of my Tinder date climbing out the bathroom window of the restaurant because I'm so hideous and they never want to see me again, that has happened. Absolutely. Like that, I won't lie. Like that's occurred probably, many times in this universe, but it's not probable. It's possible, but not probable. And is the anxiety that we're putting into this proportional to the chances of that happening? And usually the answer is no. So what are the odds is another question. And then the third magic question is, how would I cope? And that simply prompts us to realize that, again, we can handle these things, that as life, throws curveballs at us, we can dodge them, we can catch them, we don't have to just stand by as like our social fear comes true, that we can cope either ahead or after the fact. We can reach out to friends, we can soothe ourselves, we can be compassionate, use some self-compassion, that we can handle things, and ultimately it'll be okay.
We're here with Dr. Ellen Hendrickson talking about how to help your teenager be their authentic self. And we're not done yet. Here's a look at what's coming up in the second half of the show.
Here's what I've come to. So perfectionism has high standards. And so maybe you want to reach a certain social standard, a certain academic standard, whatever. It's not the high standard that's a problem. It's that the standards are rigid and arbitrary. What I mean by that is that, like, the rule is the rule. Like, it's, it's my way or the highway. Like, either I reach this academic standard that I have, or I'm stupid, or I reach this social standard that I've set, or I'm a loser. I always say, don't try to guess, always ask. Anxiety is driven by uncertainty. And so when kids come to me, or young adults come to me, oftentimes they have tried to pull one of two levers. One is trying to increase certainty. So trying to make sure nothing goes wrong, trying to make sure that they have it figured out ahead of time, trying to, plan it out, make sure they don't get revealed. Okay. So, and, you can absolutely pull that lever.
Sure.
But there's another lever that they've often forgotten about, and that is trying to increase their willingness to be uncertain. Like increase the willingness to not have it all figured out ahead of time. That every time you interact with, this person that you're interested in, like maybe a new relationship, every time you hang out with them, you get 1% more certainty about where this is going. And so having the willingness to gather certainty and comfort more slowly and be willing to kind of surf that wave of uncertainty, of not knowing ahead of time how this is going to go. So we will often work a lot on not just trying to increase the certainty, but trying to be more comfortable in that uncertainty.
Want to hear the full interview? Sign up for a subscription today. you get access to all the interviews I've conducted, as well as new episodes weeks before the general public. It's completely affordable, and your subscription helps support the work we do here at Talking to Teens. Thanks for listening.